Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series of talks and discussions about Israel since October the 7th. Our first speaker is a good friend of Wimbledon who's spoken to us many times before, Noru Tsalic. Noru has the distinction of having served in two different nationality armies, he tells us. One, the Romanian army, and lost the IDF as a regular soldier and reservist, where he reached the rank of sergeant major in the Romanian army. I don't know what he reached in the IDF. He's currently a management consultant. In his spare time, he engages in pro-Israel advocacy, especially in interfaith environments. He presented in front of the Church of England and Quaker audiences and provides support to Methodist Friends of Israel. Noru is the editor-in-chief of Politically Incorrect Politics, that's translated into Polish. Noru.
Thank you all for attending. I'm going to share the screen. So I have a presentation, which I hope I can do it in relatively quickly, and then I'll try to answer your questions as well. The first thing I'd like to say is the war between Israel and Hamas is ongoing. And the truth is, we don't know an awful lot about what's happening or has happened in the past 3 weeks or so. And so much of what I will tell you will be based on previous conflagrations between Israel and Hamas. I think personally that we can learn a lot from the previous conflagrations, and we can apply what we know to the current one. But I make this sort of proviso or caveat. And then I have a disclaimer to make. I served in the IDF, as Michael said. I think I know what I'm talking about, and certainly whatever I'm going to say represents, it's accurate and true to the best of my knowledge. But I also need to say that I don't represent, I'm not employed by the IDF or by the government of Israel or by anyone else relevant to this. And so I'm only speaking for myself. I base whatever I'm going to say on personal knowledge and my personal opinions. Okay. And then I will start with a personal testimony. And, I hesitated whether to do that because my first instinct was that I don't need to do that. But these days we're so bashed by the media and in the social media that I feel I need to say this. And this is what I have to say. This is my testimony. And I want to stress that the Israeli soldiers have the legal, not just the legal right, but the legal obligation to refuse to execute, to carry out an order that is blatantly illegal. There was a famous case in Israel many years ago, and everybody kind of knows it. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided exactly this. I served in both intifadas, and I had a lot of dealings, some peaceful and some not peaceful at all, with the civilian population or with the population, especially in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, but also a bit in Gaza. And the orders that we were always given were that we can only use live ammunition if our lives are in danger, in a clear and immediate danger. And that order was reminded to us every time we went on mission. Every single time before going on mission in the briefing, we were reminded about this. Now, when I was putting together this presentation, Hamas was claiming 7,000 fatalities in this war. I think they claim more than 8,000 right now. We don't know what those numbers include. They're likely to include a lot of terrorists that were killed by Israel. They're likely to include even the 2,500 odd terrorists that were killed on Israeli territory when they invaded on that Sabbath morning. But they also say that that number includes some 3,000 or more than 3,000 children. Now, we don't have to take those numbers for granted. In fact, we shouldn't. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They have no problem killing innocent people, and therefore they have no compunction about lying when it fits their agenda.
I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, but I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using.
I mean, this chap, Luke Baker, you see what he's saying. He is no friend of Israel. Believe me, he's quite hostile, actually, a journalist, quite hostile to Israel. But he says, a self-respecting news organization should make clear that when they quote Gaza's health ministry, which is the only source that we have for number of fatalities, is the Gaza health ministry. And he says any self-respecting news organization should make it clear that that health ministry is run by Hamas and cannot say anything that runs contrary to Hamas's agenda. Which also means that the BBC is not a self-respecting news organization, because at least at the beginning of the current conflict, they did not make that clear. They were talking about the health ministry in Gaza without making it clear that it's run by Hamas. They do this now. For the past few days, they've been doing this, I think, under the weight of many complaints, but not at the beginning. Now, we don't know if those numbers mean anything, but we do know what happened before. For instance, in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, these were the numbers then, and you can see that there is a discrepancy between among the numbers, but actually the differences are not that large if we are talking about the total number of fatalities. Where there is a big difference is in the categorization between civilians and combatants. And that's, I have to say, not, it makes, of course, a big difference. But you can see that even Israel does not deny, we don't deny that in carrying out, in prosecuting this war, we do kill innocents, unfortunately. Okay, that is not denied. And in fact, that happens, as we know, in every single war. It's one of the most awful aspects of any war. You can see here, these are NATO forces that killed these people, these Iraqis. And again, there's a discrepancy of numbers, but it's clear that a large number of innocents have been killed. But when it comes to Israel, somehow the question of war crimes and if though that killing is justified or perhaps it's even deliberate comes up. And as you switch on your television sets, you probably see this kind of images, a panel of experts that discusses all these things. And generally, the panels look like this. You get a journalist who interviews, and you get some political commentators, sometimes a professor of law or an academic, but mostly political commentators. What is missing in this panel? I mean, we are talking about war, and war is the business of military people, of soldiers. We may like it, we may not like it, and certainly we don't like war. We may not like military people, but they are the experts when it comes to war. And they very seldom appear on these panels. You know, I have a leak I own a flat and it has a water leak, a water pipe leak or something, and I'm looking for a plumber. I'm not looking for an electrician. I'm not looking for a journalist. I'm not looking for a political commentator or an academic. I'm looking for a plumber because he's the expert in such things. And it's not like the military are shy or reluctant to give us their opinions. For instance, they did give us this report, which says in no uncertain terms that Israel not just complies with the laws of war, but actually exceeds their requirements and in fact exceeds what these military people expect from their own armies. So basically they're saying, well, Israel does better than we do. And who are these people? They're quite a high-ranking bunch. Mostly, as I said, military people, generals, colonels. There is here also an expert in war crimes, but you know, experienced military people. Now, I don't want to focus on this a lot, but just what are they talking about? What are these things that Israel does to minimize innocent casualties? I could do an entire presentation about that, but I don't want to. I think you know these things. I'm going to try to focus on something that maybe you don't know so much, which is training, for instance. You see, this looks like a village or a small town in Gaza or in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. But it isn't. It's actually an Israeli military facility. It's an urban warfare training center. I trained in such a center. It wasn't as developed as this in my time, but they trained me in how to conquer a village, how to take over a building. But among other things, they trained me in how to differentiate between civilians and combatants. We had targets, cardboard targets spread in those buildings, some of them showing civilians and some of them showing combatants, and you had to hit the combatants and not hit the civilians. So, you know, there's a training in that direction. What is Hamas doing? Again, I could do an entire presentation about this, but just some points here. They, of course, are interested in doing the exact opposite, in blurring the boundary between combatants and innocents. On both sides, by the way, they blur the boundary when it comes to Israelis, but they also blur the boundaries when it comes to Palestinians. For instance, they fight in civilian clothes. And it's not that they don't have uniforms, they have uniforms. When they invaded Israel 3 weeks ago, they did so in uniforms. But when they fight us in Gaza, they put on civilian clothes. And in so doing, of course, they increase the risk to the civilian population, but they also actively use that population as human shields. You can see here, these red dots are places from which rockets were launched on Israel, and you can see they're in the immediate vicinity, sometimes inside the perimeter of humanitarian objectives. The UNRWA schools are used as places of shelter and refuge during these conflagrations. Now, sometimes when I talk about this, some people are telling me, well, what do you want? These poor Palestinians, Gaza is such a crowded place that they really don't have, as the BBC tells us every time, it's one of the most crowded places on earth. That's not entirely true, but never mind. But, so they say they don't have any other place to fight from. What do you want? And it's true that there are very crowded places in Gaza, places like this, urban concentrations, really densely populated. But if you go on Google Earth, you'll find places like this as well. These are fields, agricultural fields, with perhaps a smattering of small industry somewhere. So, especially in the south of Gaza, there's a lot of places like this. Obviously, if Hamas would operate from these kind of places, then that would decrease very much the risk to the civilian population. But of course, if they did that, they would be exposed to a reaction from our side, and they don't want that. So that's the human shield bit. They also, of course, encourage and sometimes force, in a sense, like they did recently when they blocked roads and they told people to go back to the north of Gaza. They encourage and they force people to take unnecessary risks. But this is, folks, this is just an introduction to my presentation. And I'm sorry if it was a little bit too long, but really what I wanted to talk, because as we said before, and as President Biden said, there's no disagreement that innocents are killed in Gaza, not just terrorists, but innocents as well. And some of them, many of them, are killed at our hands, unfortunately. So my purpose here is to try to explain from a military point of view. This is not about politics. I'll try not to be rhetorical. From a military point of view, why do these people die? What's causing them to die? And the first cause, let's say, of death is return fire to the sources of fire. If you speak Hebrew, it's להשיב אש לכיוון מקורות האש. That's a standing order. As far as I know, it's a standing order in all armies. It's part of a very, very basic military tactic called fire and movement or fire and maneuver. And it's, to explain it very, very simply, if I'm a soldier moving somewhere in a time of conflict and somebody shoots at me, then of course I may try to take cover if there is cover to be taken, but whether I take cover or not, what I'm going to do immediately is to shoot back. If I identified from approximately from where they shot at me, I'm going to try to take aim there and shoot back. And the reason for that is very simple and obvious. I might hit the attacker, in which case, well and good. But even if I don't hit him, I'm going to cause him to take cover and prevent him from leisurely taking aim again and shooting again. Okay, so it's a very simple thing, but it's very seldom that soldiers just move by themselves or walk by themselves into the battlefield. Usually they do that in units, and then not just walking, they often ride on these kind of vehicles, an armored personnel carrier. Well, it's called armored. And you know, I was a machine gunner first on such exactly this type of vehicle. I found a picture of exactly the type that we used. And then I was a driver of such a vehicle, and then I was a commander of such a vehicle. And it's called armored, but actually the armor is quite light. It's aluminium, because they want to keep these vehicles light, and the armor is aluminium. It's quite vulnerable, and it's especially vulnerable to this kind of weapon, a so-called anti-tank or anti-armor missile. Some of them are very sort of simple. They used these in the Second World War. Some of them are even guided missiles. They're more sophisticated, but they all have something in common, that the missile that they launch contains explosive of this type called shaped charge. I'm not going to bore you with technical details. The important thing is to realize that if this thing meets this thing, then what it does, it penetrates this relatively weak armor, and it shoots inside a high velocity jet of burning gases. And believe me, nobody survives inside such a a can. And in fact, I don't want to cause you distress, but there's not much that we're able to recover in terms of bodies from such an incident. And this is not something that might happen. This is something that has happened many times. One of the times it happened is in a previous, as I said, in 2014, a previous war with Hamas. They managed to hit one of those APCs, and we lost 7 soldiers in this. Because of that, these vehicles are usually accompanied by this kind of thing, a heavy tank. This has a much better armor, usually active armor. It has much better firepower as well, so it's offensive as well as defensive. The other one is not really a combat. It's armed, but it's not really a combat vehicle. It's more of a means of transportation. Think of it as a glorified armored bus. But this is a fighting machine. Okay, now one of the things that you should perhaps notice both on the tank and on the APC is there is no windshield, right? There's no windshield. So how do you see outside? Well, you see through a type of periscope. And when I say you, is usually the commander and the driver. They have these periscopes, and this is kind of the vision that you get from the periscope of a tank, which is much better than the other one, but never mind. Except that quite often military action takes place at nighttime for obvious reasons, and so it looks more like this, and even darker than this often. Okay, now I'm making it a little bit. When I was putting together the presentation, I realized that I'm making it too sanitized. but I can't really render the movement, the bumps, the vibrations and all that. But I thought I'd add the sound at least, okay? So this is how it sounds, except much louder than that. And we are a, you know, a high-tech army, so we also have a vision enhancing device. So that turns night into day to a certain extent, so you see better with that enhancement. But it has a problem. If you encounter a strong light, an explosion for instance, then you are completely blinded, like that. And so in reality, what you do, and what I used to do, was to switch back and forth between the two kinds of vision and try to find your way, navigate your way in this way. All right, what happened there? They fired at us. They fired one of those shoulder missiles. Fortunately, they missed. So what do we do now? What do we do now? What we do is return fire to the sources of fire. If we don't do that, then what the enemy will do, they will leisurely take aim again. Now, if they fire the second time, the chances of hitting us are much better. They would have seen where they hit the first time, they would try to make the correction, and the chances of hitting us are much higher. So we fire back. Either we hit them, or at least we cause them to flee, we cause them to take cover, we don't allow them to take aim and fire again. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that you saw approximately where they fired from. So we take aim to that direction, but we don't know what's around that point. And believe you me, you don't have the time. You're in a situation where in another split second, you might be dead or your comrades might be dead. You don't have time to, consult the lists of protected objectives. Where is an UNRWA school and where's a hospital and so on and so forth. Okay, you fire back to save your life, to save your comrade's life. You don't know what's around, and you don't know, you know even less, what's behind the target. And when I say behind, I don't mean 20 meters or 5 meters. It can be hundreds of meters, it can be kilometers. One of the things that I find that a lot of people who didn't serve in the army, their knowledge of firearms is informed by Western movies and Hollywood movies. It's not like that. The modern firearms, first of all, when you squeeze the trigger, it's important to understand that in that moment, you lose control over the bullet. There's no control whatsoever. It goes where it goes. You took aim, you shot, but from that moment, you have no control. These bullets have a tremendous velocity and a tremendous power. I'm showing here a metal plate. I have seen in training metal plates, sort of a third of an inch thick, steel plates, penetrated by bullets like they were butter. Okay, these bullets, a normal modern assault rifle, the bullet flies for 3 kilometers. It kills at 1 kilometer range easily. And I'm talking a bullet, not a tank cannon. A tank cannon, much more than that. So you try to shoot this terrorist. If you hit him, well and good, although these bullets can also go through a body and kill somebody behind. It has happened a lot. But especially if you miss, then that bullet continues and it might hit someone you don't even see, hundreds of yards, a kilometer away or more. You have this kind of situation, and you never know actually who may be hit with no intention whatsoever, no way to avoid it. The second reason why people, innocent people, are killed, I call this secondary explosions and other unintended consequences. What do I mean by that? We know that rockets are launched from Gaza. Often they are launched from residential areas. But where exactly are they launched from? Okay, they're launched from very simple, almost I would say primitive launch pads like this one. This is one that we managed to destroy. And you can see here that it was destroyed with quite a surgical blast. The houses that were in the immediate vicinity were not damaged. But what you also should see here is this. This is the mouth or the exit of a tunnel. This is where the rockets come from. This is how they bring the rockets to these launch pads. But they don't, and this is where they actually launch them from the protection of the tunnel. But not just that, often these tunnels are used to store other rockets, to store rocket fuel, to store ammunition, explosives, and so on. So you might hit such a place with a surgical limited blast, but then the secondary explosions might take out an entire street. And there's no way to know, there's no way for us to know what is in that tunnel. You can see the tunnel appears to go underneath the house. This tunnel did not contain, or at least did not cause secondary explosions, but others do. This is what happened. Again, I'm not talking about theoretical things. This is what happened in 2014 with a Red Crescent station. Red Crescent is like a Red Cross station. It's an ambulance station, and it's a protected facility. It's a medical facility. It should not be targeted. However, this particular one was damaged during an IDF aerial strike, and a few people were wounded. 3 ambulances were damaged. You'll see those damaged ambulances everywhere on social media. They are plastered everywhere, and they've also smeared them with blood to make it look like we attacked ambulances carrying wounded people and so on. These ambulances were parked there, but never mind. There were, of course, accusations of war crimes and so on and so forth. Following the investigation, and unfortunately these investigations take time, a lie goes twice around the globe before the truth puts on its shoes. But after the investigation, it became clear that there was no targeting of the Red Crescent station, and in fact, it wasn't directly damaged. The attack was on a rocket launching pit, which was about 100 yards away from the station, and it was assessed, you saw that surgical strike, it was assessed that we can take out the launching pad without damaging the medical facility. The target was attacked at night when there are no civilians around, and it was attacked, as I said, with precision munitions, trying to limit the blast only to the launching pad. But what happened, and it was clear in drone videos that were taken, that there were a number of secondary explosions. Now, the secondary explosions in this case did not directly damage the station either. What damaged the station, or what wounded the people and damaged the ambulances, was shrapnel. Pieces of metal, pieces of concrete that were flung with high velocity through windows and so on, and hurt people. And they were flung by the secondary explosions and not by the initial hit. But you know, I said secondary explosions and other unintended consequences. We don't have to have actually secondary explosions. Sometimes one of those strikes weakens a tunnel. These tunnels go under buildings, they go under entire streets. They're not all built according to the latest engineering standards. And if the tunnel is weakened and it collapses, then it's quite likely that the entire street or the building will collapse on top of it. But it doesn't even have to be that. It can be something much more trivial, but just as tragic, perhaps more tragic. You know, recently, the BBC published this article, and the whole thrust of the article was to basically say, well, look, it's the same thing. You know, Israelis kill children, Hamas kills children, they're the same. They even found two children, one Israeli, one Palestinian, with similar names, similar ages. Both, unfortunately, were killed. And again, you know, the idea is it's the same, we're the same. It's only when you delve into the article and you read carefully that you understand that it's not quite like that. The Israeli child was, unfortunately, I have to say, distressingly, burned alive together with his two sisters after the terrorists shot his parents. They set fire to the house and the children were hiding inside. So they were killed. The Palestinian child, unfortunately, was killed. He was playing outside and he was killed by a piece of rubble that fell from a different building. His home was not attacked. There was nothing wrong with his home. What was attacked was another building in the vicinity, maybe the house of a terrorist, maybe a command center, we don't know. But that building was attacked, and even that building wasn't completely demolished. It's just that he was playing in the vicinity and a piece of rubble from that building fell on him. Doesn't take a lot to kill a 4-year-old, unfortunately. So again, unintended consequences. It doesn't even have to be an explosion. Another problem is faulty or incomplete intelligence. I'll give you an example. In 2014, we attacked an office building in Gaza. Some media outlets said it was a residential building. It wasn't. It was an office building, a high-rise, 8-story residential building. 12 people were killed, and most of them, the vast majority of them, were civilians, innocents, including five children, unfortunately. And again, of course, we were accused of war crimes. What actually happened was this building was attacked because we knew from real-time intelligence that there was a high-ranking Islamic Jihad commander that was working from an office on the 5th floor. And hence, we attacked that 5th floor in late evening when we knew that, or we assumed that an office building would be abandoned, empty. The munition caused a lot of damage on the 5th floor, but it didn't collapse the building. It caused light damage on the floors above, but nothing horrendous. We expected a very surgical strike. What actually we didn't know is that there was a family of civilians who took shelter in that building, and they were living, although it was an office space, they took shelter, they fled from somewhere else, and they took shelter in that building exactly on the 5th floor. It appears that they were some sort of relative of this guy, and he, allowed them to live there on the floor where he was working. He was the boss. So again, faulty or incomplete intelligence. Occasionally, there are also target identification errors. We think we attack one building. In reality, it's another building. This happened quite a bit in 2008, 2009. By 2014, it happened much, much less because we adopted a tactic. We never sent one plane or one drone. There were a multitude of drones, and they all had to identify the target before the strike was taken. So much less chance of these mistakes, but I wish I could tell you that there are no mistakes. I would be lying. There are certainly mistakes. Unfortunately, we also kill our own soldiers sometimes. The so-called friendly fire incidents. They exist in every army in the world because obviously we don't want to kill our own people. But war is a very messy situation, very stressful situation where commanders take decisions under enormous pressure. People who are exhausted, often who haven't slept for 3-4 nights and have to take life and death decisions in a split second. There are, of course, as we know, Palestinian friendly fire incidents. I have this example from 2014 with Al-Shifa Hospital, but I don't need to talk you through this because there is a more recent one with Al-Ahli Hospital where exactly that's what happened. An errant Palestinian, an errant Islamic Jihad in this case, rocket that caused many more fatalities and casualties than in this episode from 2014. There is also the possibility of unlawful behavior by some IDF troops. I'm not aware of any instance. I looked it up and I tried to, I'm not aware of an instance in Gaza when Israeli troops shot either deliberately or carelessly, shot innocents. But I am aware of other types of unlawful behavior that did happen on the fringes, very, very rare. But for instance, in 2014, there were 3 incidents of looting that were found. So, it can happen, and when it happens, and when we are aware that it happened, every single suspicion and every complaint, including complaints from Gaza, they're all investigated by the military attorney general, and they are all a military advocate general, I think it's called. And if it's warranted, then they're prosecuted initially through the military courts, but they can be appealed up to and including the Supreme Court, so the civilian court as well. Usually, when I talk about the military advocate general, people think it's a person. It's not a person, it's a unit. There's a unit in the IDF called the military advocate general. And they have, of course, the unit has a commander like every unit, every military unit, but they have dozens of people who are engaged in these investigations. That's their website, by the way, which exists in English as well. You can follow things. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the so-called strikes on ticking bombs, or strikes on the so-called ticking bombs. This is this type of situation that occurred, for instance, in 2019. I'm pretty sure it occurs these days as well. There was a high-level terrorist who was known or highly suspected of being in the process of preparing a major attack, and he was taken out as a matter of urgency, although we knew that he was in his home together with his wife and his 2 sons. So we knew there was a high level of risk, and indeed his wife was killed with him and his 2 sons were injured. But it was assessed in this particular case that we had no choice but to take the shot, even under such circumstances, to prevent something worse. Now, the conclusions should really be quite obvious, I guess. The one thing that I wanted to make clear, because you sometimes read in the media or listen to the media, and sometimes you even listen to Israeli spokesperson who are so jaded already because they so much under attack and treated so badly with such suspicion by the media, that it all sounds. These Israelis, let's face it, were rough on the edges, and so the impression is that we don't care, that we are callous. It's only Palestinians, so it doesn't matter. It matters to us very, very much. Believe me, as soldiers, and I served so many years in the IDF, we have a pride. It's, we are professional. We have a pride and a moral standard. Even when innocent people are killed, that we can't help it, but we really, really don't like it. We really hate it. You know, if there was some sort of way, some sort of device to help us not kill any innocents, kill only the terrorists, would feel so much better. Unfortunately, we haven't found something like that. But if you look at the history, with every conflagration between Israel and Hamas, we have improved things. Every time there were better munitions, there were better tactics, there were other things that we did to try every time to minimize, not just try to win, which certainly, I mean, the purpose of war is to win, but not just to win, but to minimize innocent casualties. And that's not because we get bad press about it. I mean, let's face it, we would get bad press probably whatever we did. You know, it's a matter of feeling good about yourself, of feeling morally clean. We would like to do it. And as we are talking, I'm sure there's more and more efforts to try as much as possible to minimize innocent casualties. Now, I've got some other conclusions, but I think I'm running out of time, and I don't want to take Alex's time. So thank you very much for your attention, and I guess it's question time.
What do you think the dangers of the conflict at the moment are spreading right across the Middle East, including Iran, and maybe even further? I've heard it compared to the outbreak of World War I.
In my view, I mean, obviously, I'm speculating. It's not like I'm privy to some particular information, but a very high danger. In reality, Michael, the war has expanded to a certain degree. There were military actions or terrorist actions taken from Lebanon and from Syria against Israel. There were even some rockets that are believed to have been shot by the Houthis in Yemen at the port of Eilat. And so that expansion in reality has, in a sense, already begun. And the only reason it's not completely taken off is Israel has reacted with a lot of, let me say, care and limitations and constraints, self-constraint, I would say. We have retaliated, but we have retaliated in a sort of tit-for-tat way, rather than in the way we would normally retaliate, to try and not cause this expansion. But we're talking about expansion. Actually, this is one way to look at it, but another way to look at it is that there is a layer in the Middle East and in other, actually, majority Muslim countries. There's a layer of Islamist thought, Islamist ideology, that sees as part of that ideology a war against the West, a war against, they conflate the West with imperialism and with heretics, you know, with non-Muslims, with the kuffar. And Israel, by these Islamists, Israel is seen not just as an occupier and settler colonial and so on and so forth, but as the representative of this, enemy, which is the West, which is the kuffar, and so on. So another way to look at this conflict is that there's something latent out there that is waiting for a trigger, you know, a box of explosive that is waiting for a match. I don't know if I can expand further, but I don't want to talk too much here.
Okay, shall I hand over to you, Judy, to run through some questions?
Yes, I'm going to...
Thanks. 2 questions, one to Noru. I've got my ideas as to whether Israel is going to succeed in uprooting Hamas. Do you think they will actually be able to finish the job, or are they going to be stopped before they can succeed?
Again, I can only tell you my opinion, which is as good as yours, I think. If I had to take a bet, I find it difficult to believe that Israel will be given the slack to finish this job. It's quite a complex job. It took the Iraqi army with various, with a lot of help from NATO and so on, many months to dislodge ISIS from Mosul. Okay, it took them something like, I think, 8 months to do that. Will Israel be given that much slack? I find it hard to believe. You know, or even 3-4 months. I don't know if we will get the current government, including the Prime Minister Netanyahu. They put their almost all their political capital on this idea of completely dismantling Hamas and taking it out of Gaza. And so on. So they will certainly want to do it, because if they don't do it, they are, you know, political dead ducks, basically. You know, they don't exist politically anymore. But will they be able to do it? I find it hard to believe. More interesting even than that is, were Israel to succeed in eliminating Hamas, what then would fill that vacuum? Okay, because the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, the Fatah, will not want to come and rule Gaza on the back of an Israeli tank. It's not that they won't want it, they won't want it, and they won't be able to do it under the circumstances. So it's a huge conundrum. What would happen in Gaza if Israel were to be able to eliminate Hamas? So my bet is, my money is on a situation where somehow we're seen to have eliminated Hamas, but in reality, you know, it's kind of a midway situation.